I want to thank the senator from New Hampshire who authored this amendment that Senator McCain and I support. She's put a lot of time and effort in trying to find a way to fix sequestration in the first year, to look at programs that are not as essential to the nation, in my view, as the Department of Defense. And let me just sort of put this in perspective. I don't need a poll to tell me what to think about this. You know, the majority leader referenced some poll out there about, where the American people are at. Well, I appreciate polling. It's a tool that all politicians use. I don't need one here to know where I'm at. And the question is, do the people in South Carolina think I'm right or wrong? I'll have an election in 2014. I am certainly willing to stand before the people of South Carolina and say what we're doing in this sequestration proposal is ill-conceived, dangerous, and despicable. And let's start with the Commander-in-Chief. This is what Mr. Lew said, our new Treasury Secretary. Make no mistake, the sequestration is not meant to be policy. Rather, it is meant to be an unpalatable option that all parties want to avoid. That was their view of sequestration. And according to Bob Woodward and common sense, this idea came out of the White House, and the White House thought that if you created a penalty clause for supercommittee failure called sequestration, where you would have to take $600 billion of the $1.2 trillion out of the Defense Department, that would make the supercommittee more likely to achieve a result. And if you took $600 billion out of non-defense, that would put pressure to get the supercommittee to get the right result. Well, we're going to spend $45 trillion over the next decade. The question for the country is, can we save $1.2 trillion without destroying the Defense Department and raising taxes? Yes, we could if we tried. So put me in the camp that this is an achievable spending cut. This is not something that's unachievable. But what Senator McCain said is very important. 2/3 of the budget, almost, is exempt from sequestration. When you hear a Republican say we can find $85 billion out of $3.5 trillion in spending, to my Republican colleagues, stop saying that. That's not accurate. We're not cutting $85 billion out of $3.5 trillion. We're cutting $85 billion out of about 1.3, 1.2.5, because the Budget Control Act took off the table 2/3 of the government from being cut. Now, I'll get to the president in a minute, but let me talk a little bit about my party. The party of Ronald Reagan, the party of peace through strength, the party that believes, at least we used to, that the #1 obligation of the federal government before you do anything else is to get national security right. That was what made Ronald Reagan Ronald Reagan. That's what I believe. I don't need a poll to tell me that. I don't care if 90% of the people in the country said the Defense Department is not my primary concern when it comes to federal budgeting. Count me in the 10%. So the party of Ronald Reagan, even though it came out of the White House, this very bad idea, agreed to it. And what did we agree to? We agreed to take off the table 2/3 of the federal government. Now, Pell Grants. My sister got a Pell Grant when my parents died. Very important program. It helps people go to college who are low-income Americans. In 2008, it was $16.25 billion. In 2013, it's $41.57 billion. Food stamps. A lot of people need help. I understand that. Food stamp program has doubled since 2008. So I guess the Republican Party feels like that Pell Grants and food stamps and the FAA and home mortgage interest deduction and all this other stuff in the federal government should be shielded, but those who've been fighting the war that protects us all from radical Islam should be on the chopping block. Ronald Reagan should be rolling over in his grave. Shame on everybody who agreed this was a good idea on our side. I cannot tell you how disgusted I am with the concept that when it comes time to cut because a bunch of politicians can't reach an agreement, we fire the soldiers, keep the politicians and every other social program intact, and put half the cuts on those who are fighting the war. So the next time you go on a military base, good luck with looking those men and women in the eye, because I don't see how you could. I don't see how you could go onto a military base or see somebody in the airport and shake their hand and thank them for their service, given the fact that you've taken the Defense Department and made it something not very special anymore. So I will wrap this up here. I'm going to read I'm going to get to the president, then I'll wrap it up. This is what Secretary Panetta said. After 10 years of these cuts, we'd have the smallest ground forces since 1940, the smallest number of ships since 1915, and the smallest Air Force in its history. This isn't like the drawdowns in the past when the potential enemy was disabled and in some way rendered ineffective. We're still confronting a number of threats in the world. It would decimate our defense. It would cripple us in terms of our ability to protect this country. It would result in the hollowing out of our force. It would terribly weaken our ability to respond to threats in the world. It's a ship without sailors. It's a brigade without bullets. It's an air wing without enough trained pilots. It's a paper tiger. In effect, it invites aggression. A hollow military doesn't happen by accident. It comes from poor stewardship and poor leadership. I couldn't agree more. To my Democratic colleagues, we're not going to raise any more taxes to spend the money on the government. The next time I raise taxes, we're going to try to get out of debt. We're $17 trillion in debt, and every time there's a crisis in this nation, you want to raise taxes to pay for the government we've already got. We've got enough money to run this government if we just spend it better. To my Republican colleagues, there's not enough flexibility in the world to change the top line number. You either believe Secretary Panetta or you don't. You either believe every military commander. I don't trust everything a general tells me, but the question for me is, do I trust all the generals who tell me the same thing? Can all of them be wrong? It's one thing to have a dispute with a general and admiral, but when every general and every admiral tells you the same thing and we don't believe them, we need to fire them or act accordingly. As to the president, you've got one obligation that nobody in this body has. You're the commander-in-chief of the United States. They trust you. They need you. Your primary goal is to take care of those in uniform and their families. Mr. President, you have let them down. My party let them down. But you're different than any other politician. You're the commander-in-chief. How you could have considered this as an acceptable outcome just makes me sick to my stomach. How any commander-in-chief could have been comfortable with the idea that if the super committee fails, we're going to gut the military. And you haven't lifted a finger in the last year to do anything about it. You finally go to the naval base down in Virginia after the election, a few days before this kicks in. To me, this is pathetic leadership by the commander-in-chief. This is an abandonment of the Republican Party's belief in peace through strength. This is the low point in my time in the United States Congress. We're not going to raise taxes to fund the government. We're going to raise taxes in my construct to pay down debt and fix entitlements. So I cannot tell you how ashamed I am of what we've done to those who have really been busting their butt for the last 11 years, who've been deployed time and time again, and to their families. The thank you get from your president and your Congress is that we're going to put your way of life on the chopping block. God, if we can't do better than that, all of us should be fired. Fire the politicians, keep the soldiers.